Chapter 1. The Smell of Brine and Blood. The rain had a voice in Durnmouth. It didn't patter, it pounded. It slashed at the shingles of fish-gutted roofs and roared against the salt-slick cobblestones. It never stopped, not fully. Even now, the downpour had merely retreated to a fine, needling mist, clinging to every surface like a second skin. Isaac Thorne lit a cigarette beneath the overhang of the derelict boathouse, watching the harbor churn under a leaden sky. The smoke curled upward, barely visible in the fog, but it carried enough heat to keep the cold gnawing at his lips rather than his lungs. His coat was soaked to the lining. A boot squelched every time he shifted weight. He looked like a drifter. He was used to that. Durnmouth didn't look like a town. It looked like a wound that had scabbed over. Rusted trawlers drifted half-sunk in the shallows. Nets sagged like corpses strung from rafters. Barnacles clung to everything that stood still long enough. The townsfolk, few as they were in the streets, watched Isaac with bloodshot eyes and slouched shoulders, their mouths tight, as if every word hurt to keep in. He had seen this before. Not exactly like this, but close enough. The signs were always the same. He flicked the cigarette into the sea and headed toward the inn. The Brine Widow sat on a corner overlooking the dock, its wooden sign creaking violently in the wind. It smelled of mildew, brine, and bad decisions. Inside, it was dark and sticky with heat. Oil lamps burned low, casting flickering shadows that made the walls look as if they were breathing. The bartender didn't say a word, just nodded. Word had traveled already then. Good. Isaac tossed a few silver coins onto the counter and slid into a corner booth with his back to the wall. He didn't want conversation. He wanted to watch. A fisherman at the far end of the room coughed violently into a blood-streaked rag. No one looked up. A woman cradling a bowl of chowder was weeping silently, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. A child, maybe 10 years old, gnawed on a raw fish head like it was an apple. Isaac didn't blink. He'd seen worse. He'd caused worse. Instead, he studied the fisherman. The coughing, the glazed eyes, the pallor. Signs of blood depletion, advanced. They were feeding him too often. This town was dying slow, kept just alive enough to stay useful. A meat locker with roofs. He let the thought curdle. The mayor's office was worse. She was worse. Mayor Harriet Crail had the complexion of a drowned corpse. Veiny, bloated, waxy. She spoke with a voice like cracked sea glass, and she didn't stand to greet him. "You're the hunter," she said. Isaac didn't correct her. Titles didn't matter. Results did. She didn't ask his name. "Nothing official is happening here," she said, lips barely moving. "We've had sickness, unrest. People vanish, sometimes. That happens in fishing towns." He leaned forward. "Where's the last body?" Her eyes twitched. "We fish deep waters. Men fall in. They scream when they fall in. Sometimes." She was lying. She was always lying. That was the thing about people caught in the vampire's grip. Most didn't even know it. The vampire hollowed them out like a crab shell, left just enough inside to fake life. He left the office with directions to an empty house on Crossnet Lane. A sick man had moved away. The building smelled like curdled milk and rot. He broke the lock. Inside, the wallpaper pulsed. Or maybe that was the light. A mattress lay in the corner, stained through with black-red ichor. A chain nailed to the floor still had a shackle attached. On the walls, symbols carved into the plaster, each one a crude imitation of something far older than any alphabet. They burned to look at. He knelt beside the mattress and found the first real sign. A tooth, not human, blackened at the root, needle-sharp, bloodless. "Got you," Isaac whispered. He waited until nightfall to go to the chapel. There was always a chapel. Not because vampires feared God. They didn't. But because people did. Fear made them easier to hurt. The chapel in Durnmouth was rotting through, its steeple leaning like a drunkard. Inside, candles flickered despite the wind, and the pews had been arranged in a spiral. At the center of the spiral sat something that might once have been a priest. His eyes were sewn shut. His tongue was gone. His ribs had been cracked outward like the hull of a split boat, and from the cavity, barnacles and wet moss bloomed in glistening clusters. He was still breathing. Isaac didn't flinch. He drew a vial from his coat and uncorked it. The liquid hissed, a slurry of sea salt, iron filings, and ash from sanctified wood. He poured it into the priest's mouth. The body jerked violently, exhaling black foam. For a moment, it sounded like a scream. Then, from somewhere deeper in the chapel, a bell rang once. Not metal, bone. The townspeople gathered around the dock just before midnight. Isaac watched from the shadows near the boats, crouched low and silent. They came in pairs, barefoot, dressed in fishing garb soaked in blood. Each carried a lantern and led something behind them. Someone. Victims. Barely conscious. Some had been bled already. Others looked fresh, twitching feebly in the mist. One by one, the villagers loaded them into a large, rusted cage mounted on a boat's deck. Then they began to sing. It wasn't music. It was wet gurgling, mouths speaking in a tongue made for throats that no longer feared drowning. Isaac crept aboard the neighboring trawler, his eyes never leaving the scene. When the singing stopped, a figure emerged from the shadows of the wheelhouse. He was beautiful, terribly so, tall, lean, skin pale, and luminous like dead coral. His eyes were silver and human. His mouth, when he smiled, was full of too many teeth, all filed to daggers. The vampire didn't speak. He merely raised one hand. The villagers fell to their knees. He approached the cage, pressed a hand against the bars. The victims inside began to scream. Their bodies began to change. It started slow, skin bulging as if something writhed beneath it, veins blackening, eyes swelling like bloated jellyfish. One man's jaw cracked open in 3 places, tendons snapping like wet rope. The vampire inhaled, and Isaac saw the mist drift toward him, drawn like breath. He was feeding without touching them. Isaac loaded a silver bolt into his crossbow. He took aim, and the vampire turned, looked directly at him. The mist between them froze. Time stalled. Then the villagers screamed. They surged toward Isaac, animal-like, shrieking with inhuman rage. Some scuttled on all fours. Some gnashed with mouths that had split wider than a human skull should allow. He fired once, nailing one to the mast. The rest kept coming. He leapt from a boat, hitting the water with a splash that bit like ice. Hands reached for him. He kicked hard, breaking the surface, and scrambled up the barnacle-coated dock. They didn't follow him. Not all the way. The vampires simply watched, still smiling. Back in his room at the Brine Widow, Isaac laid out his tools. Silver bolts, carved stakes, vials of blood water, a ring of ash. He was shaking just a little, not from fear, from the hunger. He opened a pouch and withdrew a small syringe, plunged it into the vein at his neck. The convulsions stopped. His pupils dilated. He breathed easier. Not yet, he told himself. Not until the job was done. He knew what the vampire was now. Not just a feeder, a shepherd, a thalassic, one of the old bloodlines, born in the sea caves of drowned kingdoms. They didn't just drink. They transformed. Isaac had faced one before. He still bore the scars. He would need more than silver this time. He would need bait, and he already knew who would help him, even if she didn't want to. Chapter 2, The Widow's Daughter. The storm rolled back in by morning, drowning Durnmouth in gray. The rain pounded the rooftops like a funeral drum. Isaac moved through the streets like a ghost, unseen except by those who could not help but watch. He was looking for her. They called her the widow's daughter. No one said her name. Not anymore. She lived at the edge of town, in a narrow house where the cliffs broke into frothing sea. The shutters were always drawn. The chimneys smoked black. People said the house was cursed, that she was cursed, that she'd been taken and brought back. Isaac knew better. The vampire didn't waste blood. If she was alive, she was useful. If she was useful, he could use her too. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then he said her name, quietly, into the wood grain. Mara. The door opened. Not wide, just a crack. A pail. I stared out at him. Green but dull. I'm not your key, she said flatly. Isaac didn't flinch. You're the only one still thinking. She didn't open the door further. You're too late. I saw him. Mara inhaled sharply. You saw it, she corrected. Don't confuse the mass for the thing beneath. He didn't answer. After a long silence, the door opened fully. Inside, the house smelled of salt and smoke. Herbs hung from rafters, brittle and brown. Books were stacked in leaning towers, their spines cracked. Diagrams littered the floor, some biological, others esoteric. One showed a man opening like a flower. Another, a human head with something inside it coiled like a mollusk. She had not been idle. Mara herself was gone. Hair black and chopped unevenly. Hands covered in ink and dried blood. She poured 2 cups of bitter tea. Neither of them drank. Why did he let you live? Isaac asked. She laughed once, sharp and joyless. Let me? No. I got out. Left a piece behind, though. She lifted her shirt to reveal a patch of discolored skin over her ribs. It pulsed, faintly like a second heartbeat. It talks sometimes, she added. Mostly when it's hungry. Isaac stared. He planted it in you. No, he didn't. They did. The ones who swim beneath him. Larvae. Worse. Priests. He rubbed his jaw. You know how this ends. Mara looked down at her tea. Painfully. He nodded. I'll need your help. She smirked. Not many hunters ask nicely. I'm not most hunters. That's what they all say. They began with the fisherman, the one from the bar. Mara led him to the shack behind the cannery, where those who got sick were left to die. He was there, shackled, delirious, muttering about the tides, whispering names in his sleep. Mara produced a rusted blade and pried open his shirt. Underneath, his flesh had begun to blister into gill-like slits. Something slick writhed beneath his skin, just under the ribcage. They've seated him, she said. Isaac drew his knife. Don't, she warned. If you cut too deep, it'll rupture. It doesn't die easy. He paused. How long does he have? 2-3 days. After that, it'll crawl up and take the brain. The fisherman moaned. Isaac stepped back. We can't save him. No, she agreed. But we can ask him where they nest. Mara brought out a glass jar. Inside, a black leech swirled in viscous liquid, twitching against the glass. A taste of the dark, she said. He won't survive it, but he'll speak. Isaac didn't stop her. She pried open the man's mouth and dropped the leech inside. He screamed, and the walls screamed with him. They got a name. Nethermouth. Not a place. A state of being. But it had a door. And that door was beneath the fishery tunnels. Subterranean caverns older than the town, carved by the sea long before men dared settle the coast. The vampire fed from above, but the cult bred below. That's where Isaac would go next. Mara refused. I can't go down there, she said. He's waiting for me. Then stay topside. Watch the town. If they move the livestock again, follow. She hesitated, then nodded. And Mara, Isaac added, if I don't come back by dawn, I'll salt the whole fucking town, she said coldly. The entrance to the tunnels was buried beneath the slaughterhouse. It reeked of copper and decay. The walls were damp with brine, the floor slick with something worse. He lit a lantern coated in black pitch to dull the glow. The stairs spiraled down, and down, and down. The deeper he went, the warmer it became. The air thickened. The mist turned sour. He passed cages of bones, chains still latched. He passed shrines carved from whale vertebrae, soaked in gore. He passed murals, made not of paint but flayed skin. The architecture changed. Stone gave way to chitin. Walls curved unnaturally. The space no longer obeyed logic. Gravity twisted. Echoes came before sound. He had crossed into its domain. Then he heard singing. Not human. Not even close. A low, wet chanting, as if the ocean itself had learned to speak. He crept forward, down into a chamber lit with bioluminescent moss. At the center stood a pool of ink-black water. Figures knelt around it. Naked, skin slick, their spines distended. Their mouths had split to the ears. They were feeding the water something. Babies. Isaac almost moved. Almost. But then the pool stirred, and the vampire rose. Not fully, just its face, emerging like an island of rot from the abyss. Its eyes were bottomless. Its smile was older than guilt. Isaac clutched the iron vial at his belt. A last resort. He needed to see more. He needed proof. So he waited and watched as the vampire whispered to one of the cultists, who nodded, took a bone knife, and began carving symbols into his own chest, then dove into the pool. The water boiled. Screams echoed from nowhere. The thing that came back up was not a man. Isaac fled. He took nothing. Not a sample. Not a trophy. Just what he'd seen. That was enough. He surfaced just before dawn. Mara was waiting. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down. His palms were raw. He hadn't noticed. "It's growing faster," he whispered. "He's not just feeding them. He's turning them, using them to birth something." Mara looked toward the sea. "He's building a mouth." Isaac didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. Back at the Widow's Inn, they set up their war room. Isaac sketched what he'd seen. Mara matched it to old sigils, things dredged from drowned tomes and shipwrecked prayer books. They made a plan, but both knew it wouldn't hold. The vampire was centuries old, maybe more. He didn't just kill. He evolved. He adapted. He had seen hunters before. He knew this was coming, and still he waited. That night, the rain turned black. Chapter 3, The Mouth Beneath. It began with the children. Just before dusk, they walked barefoot into the streets. Silent, staring, each with a mouth stitched shut, not crudely, but perfectly, as if done by a surgeon or seamstress of incredible patience. Their skin glistened with brine. Their eyes were completely white. No one stopped them. They moved in single file toward the docks, where the tide foamed like blood against the pilings. Isaac and Mara watched from the second floor of the Widow's Inn. Messages, she whispered. He nodded. From him. From the thing he's becoming. Isaac didn't ask how she knew. She was changing too. Not like them. Not yet, but he'd noticed the way her pupils shimmered in the dark. The way she breathed slower now, almost like gills. "You still with me?" he asked. Her answer came slow. For now, that was enough. The townsfolk gathered at sundown. Not in secret anymore. They marched openly through the rain, robed in nets and fish bones, skin painted with algae and blood. They hummed that guttural song again, the one that made teeth itch and water thicken. At the head of the procession walked the mayor. Harriet Crail wore a crown of eel vertebrae. Her arms had split at the elbows, blooming into fan-like fins. Her legs dragged behind her, boneless. She was no longer pretending to be human. They carried offerings. Not animals. Not fish. People. Isaac watched as the butcher, the blacksmith, the fishmonger, all once fully human, delivered bound victims to the boats. Dozens of them, eyes wide, mouths sewn shut. Livestock. Mara's jaw clenched. They're speeding up. The mouth wants to open. Isaac checked his gear. The crossbow, the iron vial, the silver net. "This is the last night," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. They both knew. They approached the fishery under cover of thunder. Rain blinded the guards, if they could even be called that anymore. Their movements were slow, twitchy, like dolls on strings. Isaac slit throats with silent efficiency. Their blood was thick, almost congealed. The silver blade hissed when it touched them. Mara grimaced. Too late for cleansing. Their hosts now. They descended into the tunnels. Again, but this time, Isaac carried fire. They found the hatching chamber first. The walls pulsed with sacks, each the size of a child. Some already torn open. Inside, pale shapes squirmed. Mara vomited. Isaac doused them with oil and lit the torch. The screams weren't human, and they weren't dead. Not all the way. One of them crawled through the flame, burning, shrieking, a childlike shape with eyeless sockets and a mouth full of lamprey rings. It latched onto his leg before he drove a stake through its skull. Black ichor sprayed. He didn't stop to check the wound. The cathedral lay beneath the sea line, built of bone and coral. The great hall stretched impossibly wide. The architecture shifted when you looked away. Arches moved, altars bent. At the far end, something enormous coiled in the dark. The vampire. He was no longer standing. He had become a mass, a throne of limbs and mouths and spines, with his beautiful face emerging like a pearl from center. He smiled when he saw them. "Hunter," he said, his voice not echoing but vibrating the bones in their heads. "Parasite," Isaac replied. The vampire laughed. "You cannot imagine what I've become. I don't need to. I just need to end it." He raised the crossbow. The vampire didn't move. The shot hit center mass, right between the eyes. Silver screamed, but the vampire didn't die. Instead, his mouth opened wide, wider than bone should allow, and a chorus of other voices spilled from within, all of them screaming one word: feed. From the shadows, the cult surged forward. Mara through the silver net. 3 of them collapsed, hissing as their flesh burned. Isaac dropped a vial, iron and ash. It exploded in a cone of blessed flame. The vampire screeched and fell back. Isaac charged through, straight toward the throne. The vampire rose to meet him, unfolding, extending. He was no longer bound by bones. His spine stretched like a serpent. His arms split into wings. His face peeled back to reveal rows of jagged fangs. Isaac drew the final vial, the black one. Swim in this, he muttered and hurled it. It shattered against the creature's chest. The scream shook the entire cavern. Mara grabbed Isaac by the collar and pulled him back as the floor cracked. Water gushed from the walls, salt water but wrong. Too thick, too warm. It boiled. The vampire shrieked, and his form began to melt. Coral turning to sludge, teeth falling like hail. But something beneath him stirred. The pool, the mouth. It opened, wide, wider than the cathedral. An impossible chasm lined with tendrils, tongues, and human faces stitched together. It was not a portal. It was alive. The vampire was only its herald. Mara stared in horror. It's not from the sea. Isaac grabbed her hand. Run. They fled as the mouth screamed. A roar that cracked stone and turned blood to mist. Behind them, the cathedral collapsed. Not from above, from within. They reached the surface as the town began to sink. The sea had come for Durnmouth, not with